bien, mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, c'est un plaisir.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a pleasure for us to welcome you here for Philosophic, which, as some of you know, if you have come to previous editions where we talked about the metaverse, the law of robots, Philosophic is the opposite of the other workshops where the presenters talk for an hour and then there are a few moments at the end for the questions. Here it's the opposite. I have 4 speakers and I would like to thank them for being with us here. And I will begin, of course, by Cécile Dutrieu, not because she's a lady, but because she's a pioneer of FIC since the very beginnings, and I'd like to thank her for being here. And I would also like to thank Marc-Antoine Briand, who comes from Viginum. We'll explain what that is, what the role is of this agency working on the detection of manipulation of information from abroad. Olivier Kempf, also who has been with us for many years. His focus was actually on military matters. He is a military man himself, but he has a much broader vision than mere defense questions. And finally, Jean Peters, university professor, former president of Bretagne Sud University, who today is the professor who holds the chair of Cyber and Digital Sovereignty at the IHEDN. I'll do a short introduction, and then I will hand over to Marc-Antoine Briand, who will talk about the agency, who will talk about Viginum, and there'll be some legal questions that will come up, which our lawyer, Cécile Dutrieu, can speak about. Then we'll hand over to you for questions, and we should have time for quite a lot of questions, and then Jean will have to try to summarize all of that. So I'm going to begin by asking you a question of the truth and the manipulation of information. So if you were at university, I would give you 4 hours to write an essay, and it's an interesting subject. The word truth is quite complex philosophically, but this question has always been an issue. The manipulation of information is not something new. It's been with us since the beginnings of humanity. But this manipulation of information is going much more quickly than it did before and reaching far more people. Since the war in Ukraine, American elections, the referendum on Brexit, these have all been issues or things that were impacted by manipulation of information, or the Macron leaks during the presidential elections, where the debate for the second round of election was on the Thursday, and there was an accusation that the president had offshore accounts. When you do that on the Thursday before the election, when nobody can speak in public from the Friday evening, nobody's allowed to speak at all, you see the sort of trap that we have there. You send out fake information, fake news in the hope of creating bias in the elections. I'm not saying that to defend the president, that's just the way it is. And when you look at the use of technology, it takes 6 times longer for a true item of information to reach 1,500 people than fake news. So if I say something and I say this isn't true, this is the truth. The manipulation of information, which will go quickly, the manipulated information goes much more quickly than my truth, and that will cause responses. And so the more quickly it goes, the less my actual words will reach people. And so we're facing a genuine problem. Because today we talk about the digital space, cyber attacks, hacking, extortion, extraction of data, but we always forget that there is also the semantic layer of the content, the meaning or the false meaning, and that layer really is a very interesting one. And at the FIC, we are paying increasing attention to that semantic dimension. In 2007, for the first time, there was for the first time we saw the idea that this work on information on the internet could, in fact, increase tensions that are internal to society. So that was in 2017 and 2018. There was an important study conducted by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and the ISM, which is an institute of research of the military school, and we took part in this, but the idea was that there is a genuine problem and there was a growing awareness of what had happened with Brexit, with the 2017 elections, etc. And at the end of 2018, there was a law which was passed which provides that there should be better regulation of all the information on the networks during the 3 months prior to national or European elections to Parliament, for example, because we see that we can, through advertising, through algorithms which are structured and organized, we can deform the truth. In 2020, there was a task force which was created at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and the Cyber Defense Command, French Cyber Defense Command, started working on the issue of fake news, because no matter how strong you are militarily or tactically, there will be misleading information. Look how Wagner at one point tried to have people believe that France had committed a massacre in Mali. Fortunately, the French authorities had seen that coming and were able to respond to that attempt. So it's really very important to be aware of this and to respond. So Vigilum in 2021, and our friend Marc-Antoine Briand will talk about that. That's the creation under the Prime Minister and the Secretary General of National Defense, creation of an agency which he will be telling us about, a national agency. And what's important here when we're talking about so here there's always a legal basis for this sort of thing. So here it's working on the processing of data, because as we're trying to act against the manipulation of information, we process information or data or personal data, and so that is subject to rules. In 2021, the armed forces developed a strategy to fight against influencing, so cyber defense. So this is, we're not talking here about being on the offensive, like Thierry Breton mentioned the other day, when we have to be able to respond to attacks, but there's the whole notion of fighting against manipulation of information. And in the last National Strategic Review, influence is a strategic issue. It's not just something which is marginal. It really is central to all strategy. And on the 9th of August 2022, we created an Under-Directorate for Intelligence and Strategy to keep an eye on the external threat and the behavior of outside foreign forces. This is another weapon of the state at this ministry. And at the end of 2022, there was something very, very interesting. and you'll understand why here in a forum where we're talking about cybersecurity, why we're talking about fake news and the manipulation of information. It's because the European agency, the European equivalent of the ANSI, if you like, issued a report saying that there is a convergence between cyber security and the manipulation of information or fake news. Because when we want to manipulate information, we have to enter previously into systems to obtain the data that will be necessary to make the fake news seem plausible. Because if I say something that's totally false, we'll say that's not true. But if that is surrounded by lots of true, if my false statement is surrounded by lots of true information, I can always claim that because the rest of the information is true, that is true. And this looking for true information in computerized data processing systems can serve as the material for manipulating information or creating fake news. And when you do research on cyber attacks, and we think perhaps that it's a certain person who attacked a given system, that attribution is not me who does it. The only person in France who can do that that's a political act. It's the President of the Republic who takes their responsibility internationally, saying this state attacked us. That was what Thierry Breton was referring to in his speech the other day. So today, to be able to say who committed these attacks, we have to get back to the source of the information to see who launched the attack or who manipulated this information. So I have finished my not so brief introduction, and what I would like you to remember, and this is essential, is that the real battle of the 21st century will be the battle of ideas against ideologies. Humans need to keep their identity, their unique nature, their ego, and mustn't become zombies, mustn't become slaves. But what is the most complex information processing system, the most complicated one to imitate? And this is what the people in artificial intelligence are trying to do, to equal. It's the human brain, because our brains are extraordinary. And these brains, you don't have artificial intelligence or when we're talking about this cyber threat, or so it's just to say that these brains need to be protected. And how do we protect our brain? We protect it through information, education, to allow us to discern, to understand, to prioritize, to criticize. I am rather old-fashioned, where at school we learned a critical sense. Whereas today, people believe something because it's on social media or because they saw it on Twitter. And if we're not capable of controlling that information, checking the information we receive, we stop being an individual, we stop being a citizen, and we simply become a zombie, somebody who is a slave of the digital space, when we should be using the digital space ourselves to get information. So that's my opening presentation, and after that, and after listening to our friends, it will be your turn to speak. And we will listen to you. Obviously, we're going to try with our three speakers and Jean-Peter to place the questions in their context, but it is you who will be asking the questions. And if you speak, PHILOSOFIC 2023 will be your event where you can speak out. And Over to you now. After our three speakers, Marc-Antoine Briand, your turn to talk to us about Vigilum, this new agency that has been created and which is perhaps little known to our friends. If I go back to the slide I had here. So I hope it's not too small for those of you sitting at the back. And you have the first annual report of Vigilum, which is available on internet. Thank you, General. You're quite right. So hello, everybody, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today to talk to you about Vigilum and the reality of the threat. I'm going to try not to summarize what you just said in your very clear introduction, but I'm going to understand why we need to have this national agency to address this subject, and it comes from the growing awareness and an electric shock. That growing awareness has come from things you will all be aware of. The first is the growing digitalization of society and the development of new uses, which is obvious. But due to that digitalization, the networks and social media have become something that shapes opinion in a very significant way for part of the population. And the debate on those platforms are in forums where there's very little regulation, because those debates are on platforms which are not subject to European law for the moment. It may come later. And so this forum, therefore, has very little regulation. The third factor that is interesting is that we are democracies which, by nature, are open to ideas, to debate, to sharing opinions. And I think that virtue is extremely important, and we're all very attached to it. But it's also a vulnerability when there are foreign actors who don't necessarily see things the same way. So it's a strength, but it's also a vulnerability. And if you take these factors in the context of international tension and people trying to impose their ideas by force internationally, and I think our highest military authorities have said this very clearly recently, we understand then why information and news has become a lever in strategies to impose power. This is nothing new, that information should be a weapon. It's always been the case in conflicts, but with these new factors, it is becoming more of an acute issue. So the electric shock, the shock, as you said in your words, was the Macron leaks, the presidential election of 2007 in France, because for the first time, a major election, the presidential election, was the target of a combined action of foreign origin, a cyber attack first to steal data, and then a campaign to disclose, to leak information with emails and other things which had been manipulated, the content had been changed, to attack a candidate and an election. So for the first time in France, a major election was a target. And that shock gave rise to a response in several steps. In 2018, there were two things that were done. In the first half of the year, they set up inter-ministerial governance mechanisms to try to make sure that information could be shared more smoothly between all the administrations with jurisdiction in these issues. And at the end of 2018, there were two laws on the 22nd of December of 2018, which reinforced the powers of two authorities within the state fighting against the manipulation of information. First of all, the emergency judge, who within 48 hours can give an order to the platforms to withdraw content which poses a problem. And the other authority whose power has been reinforced is what we call today the ARCOM, which at the time was the High Council for Audiovisual, which has powers also to order the operators of online platforms, as defined in the consumption code, to introduce moderation, and the ARCOM can actually go and check that that moderation is actually effective, is actually being done. So those were the first two responses from the state. Then there was the Yellow Vests crisis, then the COVID crisis, and unfortunately, the murder of Samuel Paty, a teacher in autumn 2020, a French teacher who you will all have heard of, is not a serious event linked to manipulation of information. This is a question of online hate and accusations. But if you remember the different speeches made by our highest authorities after that murder, talking about the French model or freedom of expression or public freedoms, our model of society where we try to live together, there were a certain number of foreign leaders, one in particular, who were very aggressive in their attacks, who attacked the French model and said that we were Islamophobes. And this gave rise to a very strong anti-French campaign online in different parts of the world, targeting our interests, whether French economic interests abroad, which suffered from boycotts in different regions of the world, or some media like Charlie Hebdo or others. So we were the subject of a violent anti-French campaign, and that was the second step in the French response, that because of this, they decided to set up a crisis unit, a task force called Honfleur, at the Secretariat General for National Defense, and its purpose was to understand this campaign of fake news or manipulation of information against us. There were 8 of us in that task force from all the different ministries and administrations with powers in such issues, and we started from scratch because at the time in France, within the state, there was nothing. There was nothing there to defend, to analyze and characterize a fake news or campaign manipulating information. And in this area at the time, there were ideas from academics, from the media or independent research, where we were able to find some tools that we could adapt to our issue and the results. And further to this task force, in January 2021, it was decided to create a national entity dedicated to protection and vigilance against foreign digital interference. And I'll take just a couple more minutes to explain what Vigilum is. Vigilum, first of all, is not an intelligence service. It's not its purpose, and it's not subject to intelligence law. It's subject to a different framework. It is an operational department, a technical department, an online investigation department. That's what Vigilum is, and we work only on open sources. What's the scope of our work? In the mass of fake news, there's misinformation, fake news, propaganda, strategic communication, influencing and interference, and we've chosen to work on a particular segment of manipulation of information, which are the foreign digital interference operations, which are quite sophisticated, which are the technical side of the manipulation of information. So we deal with manipulation of information, but in our operational work, we try to identify these attempts, this interference from a foreign actor, a state or not, it may not be a state. And in certain digital public debates, there are certain foreign, non-state movements which are very active. The anti-vaccine movement, QAnon. So in these cases where there is the implication of a foreign actor taking part in our debate, but what are they trying to do? They're trying either automatically, intentionally, and massively, this is a specific behavior, to spread allegations, accusations which are misleading. So that's where we come to the content, and the role of Vigilum as a technical department isn't to say whether this is true or false. That's not our subject. Our subject is to show by technical means that what's being presented to people is being presented by people who aren't what they claim to be, and that the artificially increased visibility of an item has been created intentionally. So a foreign actor, a certain behavior, and the purpose is to attack the fundamental interests of the nation under the Interior Security Code. And for this, we have two jobs. We detect and characterize those operations. And we have three other operations to assist the Secretary General for National Security and Defense in their role of interministerial coordination to fight against this threat. So we play a coordinating role, and we have another role with the Foreign Affairs Ministry to establish contacts with our foreign partners, because this threat, when we're talking about social media and digital technologies, is transnational. It doesn't stop at the border. So today, by coordination, by cooperation, we want to understand the threat better to be able to prevent it. And we have a final mission which is specific to elections. In the framework of elections, and notably the presidential election, we have to provide all useful information to the three people who guarantee the elections: the Constitutional Council, the National Committee for the Campaign, which is going to assess whether the democratic debate during the campaign has been sincere or not, and then the ARCOM, the institution I mentioned earlier. And through these missions that I've just described, Vigilum does this with some 50 people from different activities: data science, geopolitics, online investigations, political science, communication, digital marketing. And I think we can say today that we are lucky enough at Vigilum to have the very best experts in France in these and other subjects, on certain threats, on certain techniques that are used. We're very lucky to have this resource. Our experts today really are a treasure, and it is great that we can use their services. That's the role of Vigilum and the scope of our activities. And then I think I've been speaking a lot. I'll hand over in a moment. But I just wanted to mention three. So what are the issues created by fake news for our society? The first is that of the resilience of the nation, which is challenged by these phenomena. And we see it's not just a technical department like Vigilum that can address this. It's a whole ecosystem that's necessary, working together with citizens, with the national education system, with a whole ecosystem within civil society to raise awareness, and the media also, to make sure that there is news of good quality. And this is important to make sure the nation remains resilient over the long term. The next challenge is a legal one, and I turn to my lawyer friend here who will be talking about that. But this challenge, as I said in the introduction, is if public debate is taking place on these online platforms, there needs to be moderation of content, but also moderation of the people who broadcast information, and people have to be held responsible for certain information that they do spread. And now, more at my level as a technical and operational service, there's the operational challenge, which is that generally, how do we make a distinction in our society, in our debate, between an opinion, which in a democracy can be shaped freely, and information that has been manipulated by a foreign player? And this is a technical issue. It's not an easy one, because today some of the people we are facing and trying to deal with are managing to get through the moderation screen and really adopting a strategy of stealth to take part in the debate.
Thank you very much.
Je crois que c'était très clair parce que vous avez bien montré que vous n'étiez pas un service de renseignement.
This was very clear. You've shown that you're not an intelligence service. You work with open source, so anything that is publicly accessible on social networks, on the internet. So it's a very transparent approach. That's right, General. I actually forgot about a very important point. Our task force was created thanks to a decree in July, but there's a second decree. It's written in the slide from the 7th of December 2021, which frames our institutional action, which lets us process personal data. Why is this important? Because it was one of the two directives entrusted to us. We had to be transparent. That's the first one. We needed to help prepare the public debate based on these two decrees. And of course, you have an ethical committee. Make sure you work this way. That's right, that you comply with the law. Let me come back to the title of our philosophic this year. Educate yourself to better arm yourself in the face of misinformation. So what is the truth? I've looked at philosophers and I've taken the most simple definition. Our notion of reality. So the truth is only a reflection of our opinions. Based on this, we should place this back into a context between the freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, what is influence, what is manipulation, what is propaganda, what is rumor, and what is our margin of freedom within all of this, taking into account the freedom of the press. Of course, influence is legal. You are not exercising any constraint. You are just wielding influence on a person or a group of people to push them to adopt your point of view. You are using different resources in this struggle for influence. So there's no constraint here. You push the person to adopt your point of view through different resources, diplomacy, the economy, culture, etc. So everything about this is legal. Now it becomes more complex when there is this notion of manipulation. It means that you use resources to try and dominate the other and to trigger emotions, because this is the way you can manipulate crowds. To push them to take action. This is where it becomes problematic. So where's the border between influence, manipulation? It's not that easy to find it. It's much easier to detect propaganda, where you are using massive media to talk about an ideology. Now, can we find these notions in the law? Not really, because in the law and laws you can come across other notions, such as fake news. This notion was heavily discussed during the election campaign to see where freedom of expression and opinion stopped and the freedom of the press stopped. This led to huge debates because before that we wanted to create a law to fight fake news, and it was limited to the elections framework. This seemed to be much more important than the spread of fake news that was not really serious in terms of the interest of the state or internal security. So we limited this law to electoral campaigns. And as you've said, the law is extremely clear. We need it to be automated and massive. Of course, with AI and big data, it's now impossible to use massive media ways to spread the information that we didn't know about before. This is why these laws are relevant. And there needs to be this will to not to be truthful. So it's about the state, hence the creation of Vigilum, but we also maintain the role of judges, judicial judges, not administrative judges. So a judge that will independently decide whether or not it is fake news. So the first case we had was a case launched by two candidates against Twitter, with a post by Mr. Castaner, who used to be the Interior Minister. And before the European elections, he mentioned an attack. And those people said, this is fake news. And the independent judge deemed that it was not the case for two main reasons. First of all, the minister rectified the information, corrected the information, and said that the word attack was not appropriate, and this information needed to have results on the election. This is manipulation. I don't know if we can use surveys or polls, but the result of the election had to be shown to be impacted by this fake news. And in this case, the judge decided that it was not the case. So it was not fake news. This first case did not lead to any outcome. So, as an add-on to the intervention of my counterpart, what we are interested in is social media. Our new tools, such as deep fakes, where video is manipulated. For example, in the war in Ukraine, there was a video of President Zelensky asking his troops to lay down their weapons and that the war was over. This was a deep fake video, but these are extremely realistic images. You have someone in front of the camera, and their face is moving, and it's difficult to tell the difference with a real video, even though there are clues to find them, such as when the person is not moving their eyes in a realistic manner. But anyway, this is problematic. And this is not an electoral campaign, so what can we do? Well, this is identity theft, of course. Here we're talking about warfare, about armed forces. By the way, the Duma, the Russian parliament, just passed a law to fight these fake news in the context of the war. So we have civilian tools when this is not in an electoral campaign framework to respond, because we have a right to privacy, and we can be protected against identity theft. So, based on Article 9 of the Code de procédure civile in France, everyone has a right to privacy, including protection of their image. So you cannot use your photo, your video to create a deep fake, even with public images. One cannot use the image of a person and try and distort words that this person used in a private capacity. So in an electoral, outside the electoral framework, there are ways to fight this. There's also the Article 7 of the law on the freedom of the press from 1981, which already fought fake news, talking about distorting the truth, and this is also about manipulation. So again, outside the electoral framework, we have resources, we have means of action in the law. Now, today, in the framework of privacy, data protection, because this law from 2018 forces platforms to be transparent, so they have to reveal the identity of companies that placed advertising on the platforms, if it goes beyond 100 euros of advertising. So everything is well structured. Is this enough? I don't know. The response of the judge is quite quick. We talked about 48 hours. 48 hours on the internet is a lot of time. But it's still a short time in the context of the judiciary. 3 to 4 days in total. And I'm going to hand over to Olivier. I think we need to be careful about semantics. Influence, manipulation, propaganda. Influence. I can try and influence you by saying we're all drinking the same water, the same brand of water. It's just because it's the best brand. It's called Nestlé Pure Life. Just drink this water. It's simply the best. So this would be influence, advertising, or maybe deeper advertising. Manipulation means changing the truth, distorting the truth, and propaganda is using facts, but trying to attack the other. For example, terrorist propaganda. I'll give you the example of propaganda. The photos of bodies in the Bataclan in Paris. You publish a photo on Twitter, you post the photo on Twitter, and you publish, this was great, let's do this everywhere. This is propaganda. You publish the same picture with another comment. We will fight them. We will fight for our freedom. We will not give up. This is the same picture, but this is not propaganda. So it's about context, text, and pretext. If somebody posts the very same picture without any comment, again, it will be different. So the same picture can be interpreted in different ways based on the comment that comes with it. Olivier, my dear friend, I remember something at the very beginning of our debates on semantics. I remember your work with Olivier Bodzuking and the late Jean-Bernard Wing on this importance of semantics. And this was years back, because of course, you are a visionary. So how do you see this issue of information manipulation, misinformation? Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming. And it's funny because I've been working on cyber for 15 years, and we invented a 3-layer model. IT people tell me it's more complicated, but for normal people, we have a software layer, a physical hardware layer, and a semantic layer, info layer. In the beginning, everyone was working on the software layer. But I was wondering what was happening in the semantic layer. This was in 2012. There was a book in 2014, and 2 years later, the fake news appeared. And you've supported us, so thank you for all of this. Anyway, what's my point? We are at the cybersecurity forum, and we're talking about information warfare. In the end, it's all about limits and definitions and perimeters. So how is this cyber and how is this not cyber? It's cyber because the semantic layer is about data, but also about data that becomes information. You've all heard about big data, about how Google and Facebook getting rich because they have so much data that they can massively process this data and monetize it. So data is part of the cyberspace. And at Facebook, etc., there's another dimension, which is information, which leads us to this information warfare, this information manipulation, which predated cyber. I'm happy you mentioned the 1981 law to show that misinformation has always been there. Propaganda has always been there. You remember the Great War, there was already propaganda. So where's the limit here? It's in this technical instrumentalization. Technology is all over the place now, but not everything is cyber. Everyone points their fingers at social media, but I would say that this is not due to social media. Let's look at information channels in France. There are 10 of them now, and even the traditional media, such as a radio and journals, have web TVs now. So it's information massification that it's not only due to social media. And you mentioned it with ARCOM. So where's the limit? The limit is based on the processing and the technical falsification of the information or of the data. This is the criteria that moves us from the semantic layer to information warfare in the traditional sense of the term. Now, fake news. Fake news, well, it's just like propaganda. It's always the other doing fake news, not us. Your example was funny because it's always the bad guy doing the propaganda, because we are the good guys. Right? So on fake news, post-truth, deepfakes, etc. So you have the good guys saying these Trumpists, deplorables, to use the word of Hillary Clinton. They are stupid, they think that the earth is flat, they are anti-vax, etc. They're stupid, they're idiots, and they believe in that vaccines are fake, etc. But what do they say? They say that we are lying to them, that the oligarchy, that the system is lying to them, that there is a soft tyranny. So we're always the bad guy to someone. Since we're talking about philosophy, we need to take a step back and think that maybe behind the stupidity of someone, there might be expectations and there might be some truth to it. Because if philosophy teaches us something, is that there is no one complete truth. There's always a part of truth in what people are saying. So this gets me to what you were saying on manipulation, propaganda, and influence. And the key point here is falsification. And you have two types. First of all, distorting the meaning. This water says it is pure life, and I translate it by saying bad life, right? Vie mauvaise in French. So that would be distortion. That would be a lie. I would be drowning fake information in true information. Of course, I'm talking next to a speaker, to an expert in humanities, but we've always done this. It's part of human debate. It's always been part of social debate. It might have been amplified by our technical means, but you can also have technical falsification, and I think this is your criteria. Do you have troll farms? In this case, we automate, we create technical means to amplify the lie. This might be a criteria, this might be a clue. Another thing, deep fakes. Somebody is taking a picture of me or filming me right now, and they're going to work on this video, and they will have me say the opposite of what I'm saying. Well, this is quite remarkable, and this is a technical intervention. This gets me back to cyber. So I'm turning to you now. So what's your criteria at Viginum? Is it the lie? Is it a technical falsification? That is my first question. Now, As a soldier, I'd like to tell you that there are criteria, because lying is quite simple. You mentioned the Macron leaks. There was a previous campaign of espionage, of gathering data, of manipulating the data before spreading this information or misinformation. So this might be one of your analysis criteria. Is this complex or simple information? If it is complex, there's probably an intent. So it means, well, you will tell me. Third and last point, Jean, the issue of the target. Well, let's keep that in mind. When we manipulate the information, and let's get back to FIC and to cyber here, the target can be society in general. The target can be the crowd. At FIC, you might have noticed it, there's a number of companies that have stands here. So the target can also be companies, smaller organizations, or even individuals. So the action that we're talking about here, subversion, which is one of the cyber aggressions in the strategic cyber domain. So you can have generalized subversion, targeting the population. Is this propaganda? Is it misinformation? It doesn't matter. But the target can also be much smaller. And by the way, when it is smaller, you can target the decision maker or the organization itself. I'll give you two examples. Nike. You've all heard about the Nike influencer campaign. You know that they have children in Bangladesh working for Nike in terrible conditions. This was probably an illegal campaign against Nike, and it's worked because it took months for Nike to get out of this mess. I'll give you another example. I was talking to a French car company, and a few years back, there was a campaign saying that such and such car component wasn't working. This exploded on social media, and the car maker didn't know what to do, but there was some sort of automatic correction. People started talking, discussing, and realized that this car component did work, that there was another issue here. So the fire stopped by itself. So that's another question. How do we put out informational fires? So how do we do this urgently, but also in the longer term? How do we manage informational crises? Thank you. Thank you very much, Olivier. Thank you for these three interventions, and we'll give Jean Peters a few minutes for his conclusions, and then we'll have 30 minutes together with the audience. Can we have a bit more light in the room so that we can see each other? Because the audience can see us, but we cannot see the audience right now. Okay, I can see a first hand raised here. Thank you, General. Thank you, everyone, for this very structured presentation. I'm Brigitte L'Herbier. I'm an MP from the North region. I'm very interested in personal attacks on social media because elected officials are being heavily targeted right now. So it's good to know that you are here to protect privacy, to protect the integrity of individuals. Now, I heard that the Viginum was here to coordinate the fight against potential attacks, potential threats, and potential manipulations against France. I was surprised when you said that you were not an intelligence agency, okay, but why would you not work with them? Do you work with them? Maybe you do. Because I think if they have specific needs, it would be interesting it would be worthwhile to have exchanges between your agencies, your services. I'm talking very candidly here. Because when it comes to foreign interference, we need to have all hands on deck. And this reminds me of the violence that we can see right now spreading abroad. So is this part of what you're thinking about, or do you think about how to respond to this growing violence, for example, black blocs and any other attack against our country?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question, Senator. When I say Viginum isn't an intelligence service, it's because it's in its missions and the legal framework of its activities, it's not considered legally an intelligence service. That doesn't mean we're not working with the competent departments, which are complementary to ours. To answer your question, we work in an interministerial system, which means we're interacting with most of the departments from the main ministries. That answers the first part of your question. On your second question, why was Viginum created and placed under this General Secretariat? It's because the subject of fake news and manipulation today touches our national interests. When these interests of national security, and there was the question, Mr. Kempfer, earlier about the purpose of the attacks. We're not just dealing with in the interests of a nation. You have our democratic workings, questions of economy, culture, our institutions, our foreign policy, a huge number of things, and all these fundamental interests of the nation, where we try to analyze any campaigns against them. Our scope, as we're working in the area of national security and with foreign actors who are interfering in our debate, there are things we do not do. For example, personal attacks on certain elected politicians. There are already departments at the Ministry for the Interior that deal with that, and that they put a lot of effort into addressing those phenomena. So that's not within the scope of Viginum, that's national. And what could be, for us, it's things that are being organized abroad. And when they touch questions of the fundamental interests of the nation and of our national security, we work with our interministerial partners to work on these things. If there is a public disorder on French soil at an event, we will try to sift through, to identify the things really coming from abroad, from an actor who's really trying to participate in national debate, and that's our scope. Otherwise, it's a matter for the Ministry for the Interior. Laurence Tomasso from Air Liquide, thank you for your presentations. I have another question about Viginum. Why do you only talk about threats from abroad? There can also be threats that come from France. You talked about the yellow vests, the anti-vaxxers, so there are a certain number of actors like this. Why open source also, especially when it comes to the truth of information? There can be things, sources that aren't open. And you talked about the analysis of the threat, but do you have the ability, the capacity to take corrective action, to prohibit or have a site prohibited, or things like that? when they could be destabilizing for the nation? You have a lot of questions there, and all very nuanced. So why, in our definition, we are working on a threat from foreign actors, state or non-state, who are getting involved in our debate? We don't just look at things from abroad. You can have a subject, a campaign, or things which are organized from France. But where it's a foreign actor getting involved, trying to raise its profile using unfair practice like bots, trolls, deep fakes. And so we will look at we do look at what's going on in French-speaking circles, but with the implication of a foreign actor. Anything where there is not a foreign actor implicated, we will consider it doesn't touch our interpretation of national interest, but we work with the Interior Ministry, and it may well be within the scope of their action. So it's not because Viginum isn't going to deal with something that when we see things, they are perhaps referred to other players who have jurisdiction to deal with them. And in my conclusion, I mentioned that the real phenomenon in cyber and elsewhere is what we really need to do is to have coordination between the ministries and to have a public-private partnership to raise awareness about these things. The state can do things, but it can't do everything alone and has to work with a whole host of other actors from civil society, if only to drive awareness. So that's a part of the answer. And I think perhaps there was another question. Yes, open source. Quite simply, why do we work like this? It's quite simply because in terms of open source investigations, we can detect and characterize a lot of things, and that's our core activity, to detect and characterize those activities and the processes by which the content is spread. We might not pay attention to the content itself, but I think one part of our added value is that we can all have an opinion on things. We think something is true or false. Our role is to demonstrate that people who are not who they claim to be are using unfair practices to amplify, to boost the visibility of some content. But then we can work on this phenomenon. There may sometimes be content that is true, but by amplifying the visibility of it, this can be misleading. So I think that in a democracy like ours, when we want to place ourselves at the service of the citizen, we have to present things to them in a very objective manner. Techniques and science are objective, and we have to see how people are amplifying the visibility of these contents, and we have to do this at the service of democracy. I just wanted to add something because there's a lot of questions on the scope of action. The senator talked about breaches, attacks on elected politicians via social media, and you said there are some scopes which are things that are for the Ministry for Justice or the Interior Ministry. You have the law on press freedom as well, on defamation. So these, I think, are probably things also which aren't matters for Viginum and which are dealt with by the judicial authorities, with the possibility for the victim to file a complaint. And you mentioned the anti-vaxxers. And just to give you an illustration, if somebody, for example, says they don't want to be vaccinated because they think the vaccine was developed too quickly, and I was saying that's what Nietzsche said, there is not just a single truth. There are different perceptions of reality, and we all have our own truth. So here, it wouldn't be misleading information, it's just an opinion. But if you take the example Olivia had in the Nike case, but if you say, yeah, I'm against vaccines, the company Pfizer has poisoned us, there I am influencing certain people who might think it's true and creating a feeling of fear, and people won't want to get vaccinated. The turnover of the company will fall, so there is an impact on the number of people vaccinated in France. And so there, that is a sort of unfair competition with rival companies. So the aim here is to criticize one's opponent, and there is case law on this sort of unfair competition. You can ask to have the broadcasting of the content on networks or elsewhere withdrawn, and to have the people convicted to pay compensation, to pay damages. But as we said earlier, it's all a question of the border and how we judge, how important we judge it to be, that people should be able to express themselves freely. But it can have consequences for a state, for a politician, for a company, and that is something which is linked to the freedom of thought and freedom of opinion, which isn't something that we should be condemning. So, and lying isn't either. If I could just add something on your question. We're very careful in France when it comes to the definition of the institutions. If I can give you an example, if you take the ANSSI, and if you compare that with other countries where they have mixed things up, like in the UK, the equivalent of the ANSSI and other things are all mixed together. But the ANSSI, the ANSI, is the fire brigade that does the prevention of fires, and which then comes to step in when there are the most serious fires. That fireman, when you see them, you say, okay, the ANSI is a fireman, and so, okay. But what is an intelligence service? So when you have, it's not that we don't trust the intelligence service, but when you have a fireman in front of you, it's a fireman. When you have somebody like INCYBER from the armies, their mission is relates to the operational engagements outside of the national territory. And so this is very clear, I think, in the presentation. Having said that, there are some people who get on with their work on their own. For cyber attacks, which are matters of cybercrime, and there are other cyber attacks, the difference, I would say, is quite slight. To give you an example, in 2017, that attacked a Russian attack, not Petya, on the information systems in Ukraine. So at a time after the war in Crimea and before the war later that year. So we could say it's an act to prepare for the war targeting the army, because when here these things affect companies like Altran, Saint-Gobain or the SNCF, that's cybercrime. But and it's cybercrime services which work under the close supervision of transparent judges. But if they don't talk to people like cyber, if the people from cyber don't talk to the investigations, they're wrong. Everybody has their respective job to do, but there has to be clear. And I'm not trying to criticize these foreign services, but when it's not as clear, it can be ambiguous. France has chosen to be very clear. That doesn't mean there's no communication between the properties. Perhaps Olivier wants to urge just a very important point, the truth. So the truth is complicated.
Yes.
And we have the law, and we have the things I have the right to do or not. But the law, but what I'm not, there are things I'm not allowed to do and that I can. But who decides what I have the right to do or not? Well, I'll tell you, and this, you shouldn't see this as propaganda or influencing in relation to the former president of the US, but do you think it's normal that it should be the social networks that that what I say is good or not. I think that's not normal. For me, it's the judge, an independent judge in a court, who is there to say what was said by Mr. Trump in his Twitter account or on Facebook is outside of the law. And therefore, I'm going to ask Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to suspend his accounts. But there, again, you have to pay very close attention, because some people want to avoid being considered an accomplice, although that shouldn't be taken in the criminal sense of the word. They're going to tend to want to take the place of the judge. And when you start to take the place of the judge, it's a whole part of our system of society that begins to be demolished, because any society is based on a reference to an independent authority, which is there to state what the law is. So it's also for the justice system to adapt to the reality and the viral nature of the networks, and to have people who are better and better trained and more responsive. Because you see that with Trump, if we don't react straight away on social media, it's too late. It's a matter of seconds, or even of milliseconds. So are there any other questions over there? I'm sorry we can't hear because there's no microphone. They do need to have a microphone for us to hear. So, and to how do we recognize these threats from abroad? But for the moment, our position is purely defensive. So in a liberal democracy, we have to start thinking about whether we might not need to industrialize the spreading of information, with the aim being to weaken our adversaries internationally. Or do we not want to adopt that position, which is an aggressive one? That's for me. Olivier, but just before you answer, if anybody else wants to speak, please don't hesitate to put up your hands, and that way we can get the microphone to you. So, Olivier, the question's for you. When we relaunched the FIC in 2012, there was a big debate about a programming law, or perhaps a white paper, I don't remember at the time. And the white paper in 2013, there was a lot of debate at the time, and when the 2013 white paper came out, it talked about offensive action. But when you look at the paper before from 2018, this offensive approach was already mentioned. And Mark reminded us of the public doctrine of the fight against influencing in the French armies, for example. And be careful here about who does what in the state. And that will bring us back to the different actors. So in the French army, in their operations, and facing the adversaries that they have for quite a few years now, have had tools. I'm thinking of the Inter-Army Center for Action on the Environment, which has existed now for a few years, and which initially was mainly for observation purposes, I remember, and which has increased its surface area and now has its coverage, and now does things which are more active. So people don't know about this, but things are being done. Then you have other government departments which are also working outside of military operations to try to carry out influencing actions, and the growing awareness of what happened in the Sahel, with what we've seen in Mauritania, in Burkina Faso and others, means there is a growing awareness among public servants dealing with questions of security and defense, and that discreetly, because it does have to be discreet, things have to be put in place. So we don't talk about it too much, but that is being set up. If I could just add one thing, we don't fight against the manipulation of information by manipulating information. So that's the sort of thing which blows up in your face and destroys your credibility. If you want to fight against fake news and manipulation, you have to show that you are somebody who has a higher interest and who's going to speak the truth. If you're caught out with your hand in their pocket, but we mustn't be naive. We need to have action, but not identical action for each adversary, for each issue. So that's not so much a question, it was more a statement. Thank you. Is it possible with could we say that deep fakes are welcome because it's the end of CCTV and video surveillance? We're freer thanks to deep fake, perhaps, no? Yeah, I'll go for that one. So are we freer thanks to deepfake? Are you saying that by manipulating the face of a person, you're making them freer? Why take the appearance of somebody else to express our opinions when you already have the possibility on Facebook? So there are people who use pseudonyms. Why take here? The problem of the deep fakes is that you take the identity of somebody and you're modifying an image or a video of them to have them say something to somebody else, something which is not true. I have to understand. I don't understand how that would make us freer in any way, because it's, I don't know, you think it's more evident, but legally be careful, because that is strictly illegal. I see another hand going up. Wait for the microphone, please. I'm sorry, we can't translate there because the person does not have a microphone, and you can perhaps hear in the room, but we can't hear up here. I'm sorry, we really did not hear the question. So Vigilum is a part of a national system to fight against manipulation of information, and the coordination of Vigilum is at the General Directorate for Defence. And you have Vigilum, you have the Ministries for Foreign Affairs, for the Army, for Justice, you have the ARCOM body which can also intervene. So through this coordination, we do manage to address the whole spectrum of this information threat from abroad. We managed to share information more smoothly. I don't think for one moment that we can avoid everything, but we do try to make the holes in the net smaller to try to catch as much as we can. In the second part of your question on a healthy, a normal, sound debate, I think that's what you were saying. I think it's not for the state to determine that the public debate on networks or elsewhere, I don't know, people can express themselves freely. What we can do, however, is make sure there aren't foreign players coming in biasing the debate or making the debate more divisive. We saw in 2017, 2018, 2020, when certain themes linked with the gun party, with Black Lives Matter, we saw foreign actors, this has been well documented, that try to find solutions for people. We've seen this in police violence and on other issues. The media have talked about this. There have been different articles. I think the interest is more to get people taking part in the debate to become aware that everything that is being circulated, that they need to have that critical spirit. But at the same time, we can't point out or demonstrate that the information is true. I'm sorry, there's no microphone. So I think that's it, because the difficulty, as the General said, is that when you say sound or healthy or independent, mainly sound, that refers to something moral. So a question of morality, where and how we express ourselves with truth is not for the judge, and you remind yourself that there are no offences if you don't have the law, the text, and the judge is there not because he knows things better, but because you, as a citizen, you elect representatives of the nation, members of parliament, senators, who will be your voice in the assembly to draft laws, and those laws will be complied with by the judge, who the judge will just check the validity of the text, and there has to be an intentional attempt to mislead. So it's true that from a moral point of view, assessing whether the debate is healthy or not, or that's not up to the judge. The judge just applies a law, and that is the guarantee in democracy. They're not making a personal judgment on what other people are saying. So the judge is independent and is going to understand whether the conditions set out in the text are actually being applied. But the aim isn't to punish somebody because of their behavior or what they said. Olivier, then we'll have another question. I add that ultimately in a democratic society, there isn't a minister of truth. And I'm not even sure that the democratic debate should have one. Democratic debate must come up with common shared decisions, and this debate gives way to allow space for all the different opinions, your opinion and the opinions you don't share, the other people that even have the right to be wrong. In fact, that's the subject. So in a democratic debate, what is healthy is that there should be debate, and that's what we have to guarantee collectively. But the meaning of the debate ultimately is not for the state that represents us, or it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to us as citizens, as participants in this democratic debate. And that is why where we reacted as we did to the situation. So it's normal that we're not in agreement with each other, and we have to have that possibility. You need to have that contrast at the foot of things, but we have to come to an agreement and to have consensus so that we can come up with that framework so that the decisions can be validated by everybody, even by those who think that the tribunals are just silly. Just to add one little thing, this might make you smile, but I think we are all responsibility. We all have responsibility in this debate. In the media, there's a question of having good, strong rules. So all the porn stars, all the stars of, and in the critical sense, and we as the state services in influencing these events, and each citizen in their own way, not to deform the debate. We all have a share of responsibility, and I think that is the issue raised by your question. It's that we all have a form of responsibility on this, not just the media, not just the government, it's all of us. And for the last question, before we hand over to Mr. Peters, over to you. In the introduction, you said that the truth takes a lot more time to be shared than fake news, and I wanted to know how at Visionum you are capable, once you have detected some fake news, to see how that is to avoid it being shared by everybody and to do your analysis. We don't work on fake news to be absolutely, it really is manipulation of information. So it's very specific. How do we make sure that this is known? I'll give you an example. And this will be concrete rather than theoretical. During the last presidential campaign in 2022, the unit was involved in a particular case I can talk about freely now because there was a documentary made about this by Cap Productions, which was broadcast last October. And during the electoral campaign, there was a foreign actor who tried to take part in the debate and in our democratic process. How did they do this? They created false accounts on different social media and tried to over-promote one candidate to the detriment of the others in order to then denigrate them once after that round. So it wasn't authentic. This was characterized. We worked on this with other partners, and one of the ways we chose to expose this was to work with this media, because as a state department, we know that what we say can be challenged. What is it that means that today Viginum or another, how do we know that Viginum or somebody else has said the truth? And one of the ways that we have that we used in this case was to give an independent media the evidence we had and for them to make a documentary. So that's one of the ways we have in our democracy to respect this editorial freedom and independence of the media while trying to raise awareness among citizens of this. So, in very concrete terms, that's my answer.
Les amis, il nous reste encore 3 minutes et 12 secondes.
Dear friends, we have 3 minutes, 12 seconds left. We'll give a little more than that to Jean Peters. So I'll hand over to him so that he can summarize our debate.
Merci, mon général. Excusez-moi, j'ai des petits problèmes de voix ces temps-ci.
Thank you, General. Sorry, I have trouble with my voice. I don't know if this will be a synthesis, but I'll try to give a personal touch, to add a personal touch to what you just said, with very interesting viewpoints. Viginum. People were very interested in what you said, and I was very interested in what you said about Viginum, this new agency, what's its use, what are its limits, what does it work on. Mrs. de Trier on the legal point of view, and Olivier, you used to be in the armed forces, so you talked about manipulation. But General, the topic you suggested is only worthwhile in a democratic society, in a way, because we are based on the rule of law. The question might not be that important in countries that are not democracies, where information is used to impose a way of working to the public opinion. So, since we are in a democracy, since we can express ourselves freely, since the issue of limits can be fuzzy at times, well, misinformation is easier, and it's harder to catch the bad guys. So let's keep that in mind. We live in a democracy. It's not easy. It's a permanent struggle, and we'll never win that struggle. I have plenty of things to say. I won't be able to say all of them, but our Western democracies are under permanent attacks from outside, as you said, but also from within. And this is an added difficulty. The Americans just realized recently that there was internal terrorism, whereas in the past it was mostly Islamic terrorists and others. So this issue of misinformation endangers our democracies, and it's good for the state to guarantee a democratic debate. I will not tell you whether the debate is sound or not, but the state should guarantee a democratic debate, and our laws should also structure this debate and tell us what is legal, what is not legal. And what you said in the taxonomy you mentioned, well, 40 years ago, there was a book published by an American linguist. I'll translate. It was called The Metaphors That Govern Our Lives. We are being manipulated by the vocabulary we use when we talk about crisis, when we talk about a sound debate. If it's not sound, if it's not healthy, then it's sick, it's ill, right? And in FIC, the companies we can see offer solutions. It means you have a problem. When you are in college, you problematize, you solve problems, and companies offer solutions. So this is about vocabulary, and this is another aspect you mentioned, Olivier. We are at the FIC, the International Cybersecurity Forum. So the question of cyber is important here. And the question of the exponential development of IT with the quick obsolescence of IT tools makes it possible for things that were impossible in the past. So now we can reach people from abroad much more easily, and we can hide much more easily than in the past, hide our identity. So technology plays a part, an important part, and it takes us back to the human question. This issue of cybersecurity brings back the question of opinion. Who do we work for? Who do we create technologies for? And everything that's been mentioned, well, there's something that I thought was interesting, because I really like reading American news. At the time, in the past, there were ideologies that we could use, capitalism, communism, etc., as well as philosophical theories that we could latch onto. And it seems like today it's no longer the case. Things are much more fuzzy. And there's another thing. This globalization of information, thanks to the internet, space to freely share information, this creates sectarianism in opinion. And in a way, we move from ideologies to beliefs. ideologies disappear and we choose beliefs. And to come back to philosophical word, relativism becomes positivism. People believe, people know, even though you will show them that it is not true, they believe, they know. So this is a societal issue, an underlying issue which affects our internal debate. We cannot no longer tell what is true information compared to a truth that is being claimed by someone. So this is another problem for our democracies. And to conclude, I'd like to answer a question that was asked, because Thierry Breton concluded his speech on what he was trying to do on the question of detection, protection, and also deterrence. And this comes back to the state. In Thierry Breton's speech, he mentioned the aspect of deterrence. At some point, we cannot only say this is wrong and identify the problem. At some point, we need to use deterrence techniques. Once again, to conclude, General, let's come back to the US. It's interesting to look at other regions. This question of misinformation in the US has again changed because there's a company that's called Dominion that manages voting machines, and it is suing Fox News, which is a right-wing channel, TV channel. So we have a TV channel which has broadcast fake news about the elections, which has fed heinous speech, and even though they knew that the information was fake, there were email exchanges between the Fox News bosses. They knew that this was fake news, but they still broadcast it. They kept on broadcasting fake news, fake information, misinformation, to serve individual interests. So this becomes very problematic. So this was my summary, General. This was also my personal touch on what I can see as a citizen. Thank you, Jean. You've been very true to the information that's been broadcast, right? And you haven't manipulated the information. My dear friends, this is the end of Philosophic 2023, and let's meet again in Philosophic 2024. I don't know what we will talk about yet, because we'll base ourselves on current affairs at the time. I have an idea. Is our self-determination being questioned by AI, GPT-4, etc.? This might be a topic that we can tackle together, because we do not want to forget about the technology, the technical aspect, but we want to take a step back, mostly for the young people. When you look at information, a piece of information, ask yourself, are people taking me for a fool? And once you've asked yourself this question, you've made a huge step, because you don't want to be thought of as a fool, so you will check the information. Believe me, it really helps. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the young members of the audience, Lycée FEDER, they're always here, and there are probably many other schools from Lille who are attending the event today. It's always a pleasure to have you. And thank you to our senator who was here today from the North Department. I hope you will mention this in the parliamentary debates. I'm pretty sure that very soon Philosophic will be quoted in the Senate as a reference. Thank you very much and goodbye.